This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 68.
They are often so capable of doing more, even that I give credit for sometimes. I'm shocked when I write goals. I had a parent who is also a teacher one time say, "Why do you only have her doing this much? Like, why can't she do more?" And it was a really good reality check and a humility moment for me of, you're right, why didn't I give her an opportunity to do more?
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Erman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Matt. Please get him a handkerchief, Rogers. Matt, I'm proud of you. He texted me yesterday and said that he is sick, and he took a sick day, and I'm proud of you. Why was it important that you took a sick day, other than just not sneezing all over your kids?
You know, I don't know if it's the world of COVID that I didn't want to make any of my kids anxious or what have you. I'm teaching my 13th year, and I've taken 3 sick days up until yesterday. So it was one of those things that and we naturally get sick, but it always fell on like a Friday afternoon that if I just stayed in bed all weekend, I was ready to go on Monday. It got to the point that I always have like a runny nose or a hacking cough, but those were all just so general. Luckily, nothing more severe than that. That wasn't going to go away anytime soon. So there are definitely days that I thought that I probably shouldn't have, but I came out of Sunday just not feeling right, recognizing that it might worry some kids, and I took a day and I legitimately slept 90% of the workday, and then my wife came home, and then I went right back to sleep after we had done dinner. So it is a big moment.
Yeah.
Number 4, I've got many sick days in my bank.
Yeah, I was going to say
we don't have to use them.
You have plenty to dip into there, but hopefully it's maybe something you've gleaned from the show, because we've heard so many times about sharpen the saw and all those other components of we have to take care of ourselves to be able to give best to our students. So we just got off an awesome recording with the Arkansas 2022 Teacher of the Year, which it was very obvious why she was the Teacher of the Year. I say that at the end of the show. But, aside from her wealth of knowledge and I'll say her experience and her humility as a special ed teacher, I think we have incredible conversation about the balance of being in a special ed classroom versus transitioning into inclusion. I think we really went in depth there more than we ever have before. But tonight for me was a really cool moment for this podcast, because towards the end of the show, she shares about her experience as a military wife and what she is doing to support military families and more specifically military students that are a part of those families. And she talks about the emotional toll, the logistical toll of like credits and different things. And I made a note to myself that I'm going to promote the heck out of this, because for anything else, this show has from the beginning been about empowering educators that are listening, empowering the guests that we have to just feel good about what they do, to have that moment to shine and share what makes their classroom special. But this is something I've never heard of, and I want as many teachers as possible to see that and hear that. So if you follow us on social media, I'm going to recycle that clip that she shared about that and the resources that she's going to share with me over and over and over again. And I don't care, because even if it helps one person find it, I think it's so important.
Totally agree. And, she brings up some features that, you know, if you're not in that world, you wouldn't ever begin to think about it. You know, just simply, and not to spoil it, you know, a kid moves into a district, you know, a little bit late into a school year because of a placement, and whether it's changing states, you know, I always think about them finding friends and, you know, settling into their house and those features being disruptive, but not necessarily the school experience of what classes count for, you know, college preparatory, or those clubs and organizations that have already voted for their presidents, those type things. You know, they work so hard to kind of create as even of a playing field as possible. And it's totally fascinating. The one thing I do want to say about what we spent the most time talking about is the balance of being a special ed teacher. And I thought it was kind of interesting. She shared how in tune she is with her teachers, just at a text basis. And I just, one of the things that sat with me was she said multiple times that if you needed her, she would be there as frequently, whether it was her, she would love for it to be her, or it would be a member of her staff or someone to support. But a reminder that when you call for support for one of their students, they're going to process through trying to make sure that it, in all cases, if they are in an experience, they have the opportunity to be successful there before just yanking. And I think sometimes we as educators often think, you know what, this kid is having a difficult time. You administer the supports for this assessment, or you manage their behavior that's getting out of hand. Get them out of the environment so it can settle down. And realistically, more times than not, and we know this after the fact, is a lot of times the behavior or those challenges, what the kids are trying to do is they're trying to get out of an environment. So you're only reinforcing what you don't want to reinforce. And when we're talking about lifelong skills, especially in the special ed world, our goal is to kind of create an environment where they are successful in what she mentions, the least restrictive environment for them, whatever that might be based off that scenario.
Yeah, I think what our listeners can take away from this episode, everything you just shared, as well as whether you are, you know, it's safe to say that almost every educator is falling in the column of special ed teacher or regular ed teacher. Even counselors, you're kind of like, you know, you're playing both sides of that coin. But the point is, we're all supporting students that are in the special ed world, whether we're on one side or the other. And I think listening to Jessica, I know she did for me, she reaffirmed and changed my mindset and attitude about just how different things are set up and about how we're interacting with students, how we're interacting with our colleagues to provide the best situation for all students. And so I think this is a really important episode for anyone to listen to think about your mindset and your attitude and the way you're setting up your classroom for those students. So we could talk all night about this, but I really just want to jump right into the interview with Jessica Saum. Hi, Jessica. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We're really excited to jump into this conversation. So just start things off nice and simple for us. Officially introduce yourself. Let us know where you're coming from and just kind of give us a snapshot of what your career in education has looked like.
Absolutely. So I am the 2022 Arkansas Teacher of the Year. I live in Sherwood, Arkansas, but teach in Cabot, Arkansas, which is right in the central part of the state. I am a special education teacher, and I teach in a kindergarten through fourth grade self-contained classroom, which means that my students spend most of their day in my classroom with me. They receive all of their academics in my classroom and then have other opportunities to learn alongside their grade level typical peers through activities, lunch, recess, and then whatever time we found that benefits them the most in the general education setting. I've been in this class and this school for 4 years, and prior to that, I taught preschool, and then I was a preschool early childhood interventionist before that. And then prior to that, my husband's in the military. We lived for 5 years in Germany. I worked as a paraprofessional in a special education classroom and then stayed home with my children when they were born. They were both born over there.
Wow, that's an incredible experience and background.
Yes.
To really start this off, can you paint the picture of what your room looks like? I know there's never a typical day in teaching, but on a typical day, he as a former fifth grade teacher, now instructional coach, hearing self-contained kindergarten through fourth seems extremely overwhelming right off the bat with having that much diversity just in age with you for a majority of the day. So just, kind of what does your classroom look like? How are instructional routines set up? How many, hopefully you have a couple people in there to help support you.
Yes. Yeah, so I think diverse is probably the best word you can use to describe my classroom. And a lot of times that's the term that I use to describe the students, is they are just a diverse group of learners. So my classroom has kindergarten through fourth grade. I started the year, it's a 1 to 15 setting. So technically it could be 15 students with me, but I have 3 paraprofessionals. When we started the year, I had 9 students on my roster. I currently have 13. So throughout the year, different students will place or move in from other areas. Typically, we do not start the year with a kindergarten student, but oftentimes they do begin placing as needs are identified. So every morning, our school is offering free lunch and breakfast. So after the students transition down from breakfast, we always have some sort of table activity, usually something themed with whatever we're doing in class, whether it be science-based or just with the seasons. And we do that for a few minutes while everyone kind of gets in and we get the chaos settled. And then we have our morning meeting. And that time we've kind of gone back and forth with COVID and with the different changes and how we were learning. But we found that time for our classroom was so important to just connect and begin our day together. And the very first thing we do is we have a song that we start our day with, pretty set for the week. A lot of times I'm a huge Cuckoo Kangaroo fan. So a lot of times we start with like one of their songs and we just dance. And so I have a Google slide with different pictures of me with my Bitmoji character, and each one's a different song or a different phonics lesson or something we can click on to start our day. And the kids know that routine. I might change the pictures depending on the month or the season again, but we always start with a song. We have, Move It Monday, Taco Tuesday was today. We'll have Wiggle Wednesday, and we all begin with that movement together. And I feel like it's such an important time for us to just sit down, remember why we're at school, review any expectations, or if there's a fire drill or a change in the schedule, we can talk about it. We talk about the weather and just try to incorporate as much into it as we can. We can do number recognition with reading the weather report. And we use conscious discipline. So we have a wish well board and we look to see who's there and who's not. And we always kind of just take a breath, close our eyes, and we wish them well. And we make sure to touch and talk to one another and wish each other well just to start that day. If we've had a difficult day the day before or we ended, maybe not on a positive note, I try not to, hang on to that or harp on that, but just remind them, yesterday's over, it's a new day, and this is what we're going to do today. We're not even going to talk about, whatever that was yesterday. And then from there, our day just kind of goes crazy. It's very important to me that my students spend time with peers their age, their grade in that general education setting. And so I make sure that every grade level goes to activity with a general education class that they're connected with. And then they also go to lunch and recess with those peers so that they're having those experiences, on an age level. It is really hard. We have kindergartners coming in who some of them haven't been in school before. They maybe been in developmental preschool, and they really, like most kindergartners, don't know what's going on yet in the world. They don't know how to line up. They don't know those expectations. And so it's great to have some of the third and fourth graders be able to model those for them and share with them some of those expectations, but they still need experiences alongside their peers. And so throughout the day, they're kind of coming and going. We have therapists that push in and pull out. So they might provide some of those therapies in our classroom when it's appropriate. A lot of occupational therapy can be done in the classroom. Speech therapy typically pulls out, and our physical therapists a lot of times will try to go to recess or PE and use those times again with peers to practice skills that are socially important as well as to their development. And then the students will kind of rotate either between centers. I have some different learning stations, or working with myself or another paraprofessional on some of their individualized education plan goals. And so sometimes we can do small group lessons if it's phonics based and we have same grade level, or if I can, if we're doing math and I can change the work to the appropriate level, I can sit in a small group. But we just move the students throughout different spaces in the classroom and try to have workstations and centers that really support some of the skills that they're working on. Sometimes they're fun. We have different building things in our science center, but again, that's supporting their fine motor needs and just those social skills of working together to accomplish a task. And so it's a really great place. It's not usually a quiet room. You can hear us, but I have a huge beanbag in our reading center and a couch. I have a trampoline because sometimes we need to move and jump. I have a cozy cube that has some blue lights around it and a beanbag in it, and it's just a place you can go and calm down and chill out. And I make sure to offer that as an option of, if you need a break, you can ask me for, some sensory input or a fidget, or you can ask just to go take a break and be left alone. And that's something that we found is really important. Students need a place to learn their self-regulation skills. And so we try to provide a few of those throughout the room.
That is beautiful. And I think especially after, coming back to school, and I don't know how the pandemic quite affected your classroom and really your district and area. Both Ken and I are in Pennsylvania, so I know from our end we had fairly minimal amount of time away from school, but we are still, even though most of our learners were in person all but 3 or 4 months, we are still recuperating so much of what school looks like and all of the parts of that. One of the things, I guess I have many questions, but how has your classroom changed in the last 2 years? Because in some ways, there was a big push in special education of, executive functioning, and these skills to, be successful human beings are often more the priority over, the academics. Not to say academics aren't important, but those nonverbal cues or routines are things that are really challenging. I'll give you a clarification. I started my career as a learning support teacher, so not as intensive. I was 4th and 5th grade primarily, but so much of our time was spent on looking at unique ways of how students learn so that eventually they could be more successful in that kind of grade level, maybe regular ed classroom, whether it's exposure or an isolated area that they are at grade level. So really, what is your kind of emphasis? And I don't want it to be so much COVID related, but how has your classroom changed and adapted? And really, is it similar to regular ed classrooms now because they almost need to provide as much support to be students again?
That has been really interesting. We did our school stayed open. We'd have a few days we'd shut down, or maybe a specific building or classroom because of COVID would shut down. But our school stayed open as well, and so we had most students provided, receiving services in school. We did have quarantines, and that was quite a thing to adapt to because we were still providing services virtually that way. But besides families who chose our virtual academy or chose to homeschool, we had in-school learning all year. But we did have to be much more careful about spacing and shared materials. And so where I had a lot more center learning pre-COVID, I had to be really careful about that because things had to be sanitized. So I started having task boxes that could be taken to desks. So when we were able to go back to centers, I minimized how many of those stations I had and really tried to have them be purposeful, but still had boxes of manipulatives and different activities students could have at their desks. And I found that to be more successful because I had to be more intentional about what I was giving students to learn with. I still had fun things out, but they needed to support their goals and they needed to have a better purpose. And so that was a really good thing that came from it. But it was difficult because students missed out on so many experiences socially. I have a 3rd grader and a 4th grader. I saw it in them as well. And just like, hey, we can't say that, or this is the proper way to say this. And just forgetting sometimes I expect a yes, ma'am out of my personal children, forgetting that sometimes, or the please and thank you. Like, you guys could sign those when you were babies. Like, you've always done this, but they weren't practicing with other people outside of the home. And so one thing we tried to do at school was bring in as many opportunities for those experiences virtually. So at least kids were still getting some of them. But it did hinder my personal students because they weren't able to do as many things in the general education setting. They weren't able to go and just be as fluid moving throughout the day because we had to track who was sitting where and were they exposed? But we have definitely seen an impact, I feel like, for all students socially. And so we are having to go back and kind of teach and remind of those things that, depending on where you live, could be considered rude, and just remind students of how we interact. So I've continued to provide those in my classroom. I know a lot of families, maybe they aren't going out to eat, they aren't going to a movie, they're not they're not traveling for holidays. So one thing we did this year at Thanksgiving is our school always does a Thanksgiving lunch from the cafeteria. We practiced setting a table and sharing a meal and staying seated until the meal was over and clearing the table together and practicing those things and giving students those opportunities to practice those skills. But that's something we can see a need, and no matter the most typical student could benefit from that. And I think we are seeing that in all classes, that students need reminders of how to play with basketballs on the playground. And it's a really interesting shift of how general education teachers are kind of having to pull back, even with the older grades, the third and fourth, the higher elementary grades, and remind those students of those expectations and those social norms. But with my class, we did really kind of take up the learning a notch, and we're trying to mirror general education skills and general education standards, but really bring it to a level that students can be successful at. So I have a few students who have mastered addition with smaller numbers, under 20 or up to 50, but they really struggle with just the counting, the one-to-one correspondence. They can get lost and it's difficult. So I know they know the steps. I know they know the process and what the problem is asking. So we've started offering a calculator for bigger problems. So now they're able to do much closer to grade level work with a support. And realistically, as they get older, most of them are going to have a phone, an iPhone, or some device in their hand that they can use to add. And if they're getting the concept and they're understanding the process and they can still be successful, then why not provide them that support so they can do more work in line with their peers? One thing that we've also seen that's been great is I have a few fourth grade students who do really struggle to read. They're not at a grade level, reading level yet. And so they were going into one of the classrooms and listening to the general education teacher do a short read aloud every day. And this is where I've just seen the collaboration with teachers back together, because we're having to figure out how to serve these students' needs and some of the needs we haven't seen in so long. She had some students in her class that were struggling, and she needed to provide some more interventions too in that time. So she asked if the students that were listening to her read could instead peer read with students in her class. So it was giving her students a chance to read aloud and kind of lead, even if they weren't the student that maybe would normally read aloud in class. And it provided my students with a more meaningful experience, a relationship with a peer. And it showed that collaborative piece of when we start thinking, okay, what do all of these students need to get back to what we expect of them, or to that level that was typical pre-COVID? When we work together, we really can meet their needs. And I think I've loved the most that, before COVID, there was always that excuse of, well, this is how we've always done it, so we've got to keep doing it this way. And that excuse is kind of gone. We don't get to fall back on that anymore, which is great because we can get rid of the stuff that doesn't work. We can go back and really hang on to the things we know this is effective, that this is scientifically proven. But those things that we were doing just because we'd always done them, they get to go away. And I'm really excited about that, because we get to reimagine what that success really is and what our students truly need to be successful. And that's exciting to me about the future of education. We get an opportunity to kind of restart and refresh what needed to go.
Can I tap into that? And
Yes.
not to be super specific, but we as educators hear about how there's paradigm shifts between, especially in special ed, the classic is inclusion with minimal supports, but obviously there to support. But the idea of them exposed to grade level material is a high priority. And then when we see that they may not have the foundational skills to be as successful, then we shift to more pull out and intensive instruction at their level that hopefully leads them. And sometimes we struggle with high expectations. Not that that's really the fault of students or really the teachers, but there is that paradigm shift. So I guess my challenge is, I can tell you, when I came out of college, everything was inclusion. The only thing that was right in education was to consider inclusion. And I remember going through elementary and middle school, and actually as a special ed student in certain areas, I would have benefited from inclusion, but I didn't experience that in my educational journey. All of that to say, as we go back and forth, A, how has your career been affected by that? And B, leaning into we're having the opportunity to redefine what education looks like. And you're saying, you know what, let's focus on the things we know that are successful and get rid of the things that we know are not successful. As we move into the shift of education and we have the opportunity, what are some of those things that you say to yourself, these are the things that we need to include and prioritize, and these are some of the things that we can say, you know what, they're not really achieving what we want them to. Sorry, that's a massive question to
Yeah.
land on you.
Well, I love the inclusion piece is so important. And I know Arkansas is actually, we're currently from our State Department getting new guidance on inclusion and how that needs to change. We have too many students in too restrictive environments. And so our state's having to look at that and how we're providing our services to students and what we need to do to change that. And that's kind of a big push for mine as a special education teacher and as the teacher of the year is, yes, we need inclusion, and inclusion is important, but just saying, all right, I've got this chair right here for this student and they're going to come sit here and they're included. That's not inclusion. It's got to be meaningful. And so I had a chance to speak with some students who were planning to go into a teacher prep program last week. And the thing that I left them with was that if the table isn't big enough or if it's not accessible, it's their job to build the bigger table or to make it accessible. And so that doesn't mean that we're just going to bring them in to listen to the teacher read aloud. That was on me. That was what I asked of her because I assumed that would be what was best for the students. This general education teacher, who is just amazing and wonderful, saw that there was something better. She knew there was something better for the students. And I think that's where we've got to get. We have these professional learning communities and we plan together as teams, but are we really planning as a building? Are we really planning as a district? Are we looking big picture of what's happening in the grade before these students come to us and what happens when they leave and what do we need to prepare them for? And then are our special education teachers embedded in that and a part of it so that they're having a voice as, okay, this is what this grade is doing. What can I do with them? How can I support them in supporting my students? And how can they support me in making goals that are appropriate? Building off the vocabulary that they're using, whatever that curriculum is that they're using, taking that vocabulary and pulling it in. If I can work with a speech pathologist and I can front load students with vocabulary before they go into a science lesson or a social studies lesson, most kids like those things. They're fun and they're engaging, they're hands-on, they're not as intimidating. So how can we prepare them for that? I think is just really setting them up for success. So then they can walk in the classroom and feel like they have something to add, feel like a meaningful member of that community and not just a guest that comes and sits at another extra table during activity or during that reading time. And that for me is where I've had to change and where I've had to have higher expectations. We as educators have to assume competence from all students. And that's not just the special ed kids. That's our kids that are coming from really difficult areas or situations. We can't say, oh, we know that family, we know that student, we know this, and assume that they are not capable. And we do that. I think every educator is guilty of that because we talk to each other, we hear stories, we see the family, and we don't assume the best out of them. We label them, we label, oh, that's a SPED kid instead of that's a student that receives services to help them be more successful. We look at these things as placements and dead ends and not stepping stones to the next thing. And I think that's one thing we really have to do as educators is this is where we're at now. This is not where we're planning to stay, but what do we have to do to get there? And how can we work together to ensure that happens? I have a student in my class right now. She's in first grade. She placed in her kindergarten setting, and her first grade teacher's classroom happens to be right next to mine. And we have worked throughout the year to have her spend more and more time in that general education setting. And a few weeks ago, she came to me with a assessment she had done with her in the classroom. And it was a grade level assessment that she had done in the class with all of the students. And this student who had been spending more and more time outside of the special class setting in with her peers, with these grade level norms, these social norms, not just the academic piece, the social piece as well, was getting a 96% on a phonics assessment she had just done. And to be able, I walked her out to her car that afternoon and climbed in the car with her mom. And I'm like, she did this without me. She did this in another class with no paraprofessional, no special education supports. Like, she is capable. And that is where we have to get back to assuming that for all kids. I should always assume she has the opportunity to do that. And if we start doing that at the elementary level, this is where it really matters. We can't get a kid into high school and say, okay, now we're going to try to get you to take this test that gets you to college, or that we have to have you take. That it's got to start at an early age. And the more we do that, and the more as special educators, we support those general education teachers, we share with them what a student can do. These IEPs go on and on. I get emails, this student, they can't, or they do this, negative, negative. Never, she's amazing at this. She responds well to this. She's excited to learn this. We have to look at the cans and not the can'ts. And that mindset shift of what I get to do this with students, not have this student again, or we're getting another member of this family again. That's what's really going to have to change for us to see real results and real changes, I think. So I hope I answered that. The inclusion piece captures me because it is so important, but it has to be meaningful. It has to have a purpose, and it has to be collaborative, or it's just a guest coming in to sit there for a bit.
I think you answered it beautifully. And coming from, I'll say, the other perspective, a large majority of my career I spent teaching fifth grade, teaching regular ed fifth grade. And in the school I was in my district, we will typically have different programs. We have 7 elementary schools. So some of our different special ed programs are in different buildings. And the one I was in, naturally, we had learning support in every building. And then we also had more of our higher level autistic support program in my building as well. And so fifth grade was also the last elementary grade. So I would typically have a few students from both of those classrooms in my homeroom, sometimes included for, most of the subjects, all the subjects, just science and social studies, and then obviously specials and lunch and recess. And a lot of times there were students that were transitioning into new subjects for the first time because that was going to be their reality in middle school. The way the middle school program was set up, it was co-taught classrooms, or so a lot of times it was that piece of let's get them ready, maybe the second half of the year. And I think that the thing that I love that you said, I wrote it down here, and I hardly ever write anything down when we're recording, is that you want them to feel like a meaningful member. And I always felt like I had moral dilemmas with what was the point of what we were doing. Sometimes I felt like the content was always the focus. Like, let's give them this version of the test, this version of the study guide, so that they get this grade. And yes, I want them to be successful, but sometimes the focus is so heavy on the content that we're losing sight, in my opinion, we're losing sight of why do we want them to do well on this test on Earth's biomes? Not because I want them to know what Earth's biomes are for the rest of their life, because I want them to feel confident that they can be successful in my classroom. And so, now being in an instructional coach position where I see a little bit of a bigger picture, the conversations I see and hear, I feel like so many of us in the classroom, whether it is the special ed teacher or it is the regular teacher, we're losing sight of what all the what the purpose is. And it's like you said, it's so that they feel like a meaningful member, so they feel like they can contribute, that they're not just sitting at that extra table. When a big one that I would pull kids into typically was reading. It seemed like they were transitioning back into reading more than they were in math in fifth grade. And, two things that I learned after doing it for a few years were, one, I wanted them to feel confident to participate in book discussions. That was typically something that was caused a lot of anxiety to them. So whether it was them reading it with one of the paraprofessionals the day before, the chapter that they were going to read, and they could have some discussion so that that student would then feel like they understood it a little bit more while they're reading it the second time. They're not trying so hard to just comprehend what's going on. But also, a lot of the things happening in the learning support classroom, those students were actually better than my regular education students. Like you talked about the phonics piece, that was typically covered much more heavily in the special ed classroom. So when they would come in and we would have some of those moments, I could actually lean on those students as like the star of the classroom because they had such a better foundational understanding of that because that was part of their program to get them back to grade level in terms of reading comprehension. So you're speaking to what I felt, what I always felt was so important, and that like moral piece of that. So, you know, keeping in mind everything you just said, what are some other strategies as a general education teacher that I can do to make sure that a student transitioning into my classroom, whether it's the first time or like that first grader you were speaking of, is doing a little bit more, a little bit more? How can I feel like there's two pieces. You like don't want to point them out because that'll make them feel pointed out, but you also want to, in my opinion, deliberately make them feel that you know that this is going to be a struggle for them, or they might be a little bit nervous. So what are things that I can like explicitly do to make this student feel more comfortable, and maybe implicitly do with the group as a whole?
I think a lot of times we see some of our students who are able to move into some of those less restrictive settings through whether it be from a 1 to 15 to resource and then maybe just inclusion or supported. We have a lot of students on the autism spectrum, and they are oftentimes very high academically, but it's those social pieces and those routine changes that can be a huge struggle. And so a lot of times can read at a very high level, like you said. So if I know a student's going to have a schedule change or know something different's going to happen, sometimes just a note on like a sticky note on their desk. So if you know that you're going to be reviewing something out loud and you're going to want them to read, you could kind of front load them up with that. Like, hey, we're going to be coming to this in 10 minutes. Or you could just have it as a note on their desk. I want you to discuss question 13, or whatever it may be, so that they have that opportunity to be prepared and it not be a shock. And that is one of the biggest things I see, is just having those changes and those events that can be throw them off can make things spiral. So if they have a heads up, if they're aware of what's going to happen, or a question that you might call on them to answer, it really can help. If you are doing a timed math test and it's all a similar type math problem, if everybody's doing 10, there's no reason that student can't do 5 if they process things at a little bit lower speed. And that's one thing I see. My daughter, she struggles so much on time tests, and she brought me home a multiplication test and she had missed. She's like, look how many I got wrong. And I looked at it, I'm like, you didn't get any wrong. I'm like, you got all of them right that you answered. You just didn't answer all of them. So let's sit down. This is how many you were able to get in that 2 minutes. So let's go back after this and see how many more you can get. These won't count towards that point, but how many more can you get right? How many more do you know? And so that's another thing you could say, hey, if this is the sheet of facts, the multiplication facts we're going to fill out, I just want you to do this first row on this timed part, and then we'll come back and you can answer those later when you have time. So it's not so overwhelming. Just little changes like that, which really can apply to a lot of your learners in the classroom, other kids that struggle as well, can make a big difference. I think what you said, having the paraprofessional read with them the day before, or whatever other resources and supports they're getting, having them have that opportunity to have access to it the day before is always a great idea. I've seen in some of the older grades that we switch out if they're taking notes, which again, a lot of students are very capable of that. Their notes might not be as good as everyone else's and might not have as much information, but go ahead and do what you can, and then I'll trade you. I'll give you a copy of my notes if you show me yours. So at least then they have all the facts. They can go home and work with their parents, but they at least made the attempt. They're doing the work alongside their peers. They're not just sitting there listening, because they are often so capable of doing more, even that I give credit for sometimes. I'm shocked when I write goals. I had a parent who is also a teacher one time say, why do you only have her doing this much? Like, why can't she do more? And it was a really good reality check and a humility moment for me of, you're right, why didn't I give her an opportunity to do more? This is a whole year. This IEP is going to be for, 12 months. Why don't I at least see how much further we can get, so we don't finish them all and I say, oh, she mastered everything, if I didn't challenge that student enough. But challenge them and find those limits. It's going to make for some hard times sometimes. That student I talked about that's in the class next door to me, she can get really frustrated. She can get upset. But then she has an opportunity to go sit at the teacher's table and do the work if she wants to do it there, because maybe it's not as intimidating as sitting at a table with peers who are able to see what she is or is not doing. Give her a little bit of a private space. And if she gets frustrated, go ahead, take a breath, get a sip of water, and come back in. So being willing to be flexible, which can be really hard, and being willing to understand that this is where they're at today. If they're only able to do 5 today, let's see if next time you're working on this, we can do 6, and continue to challenge them, because that expectation piece is high. And I've said that about myself. Sometimes my expectations can be too high, that then I can lead a child to get frustrated, but I never want to assume they can't. I always want to give them that opportunity, but understanding that they might come to it in a different way, or have to show me mastery in a different way. It's always amazing to me when we do hold students to those high standards, when we do say they can, what they can rise to do. I have a student in my class now. When he came to us, they told me he doesn't talk. And this is, again, those emails of he doesn't talk. He runs away. It was all these negatives. He can talk. He can say so much. He doesn't love to talk, but we had to find different ways to get him engaged to talking. So he didn't want to write for me, and he didn't like speaking. But I found an app called Chatterpix that a coworker shared with me. You take a picture of like a doll or an illustration. You can make the mouth move. It's amazing, and it's free. So now he'll write, because he'll want to write, and then make the picture he drew say what he wrote. So now I can get him to write. I can get him to speak. And mom, who doesn't always get to hear his voice a lot, I can text her the video that I recorded from Chatterpix and share with her. So now I've engaged his family. I have a parent partner, someone who is getting to see her child's success, to know what he's truly capable of. I'm getting to do his writing that I need him to do for his academic success, and I'm giving him his voice back. And he loves it. He wants to do it. So realizing it's not necessarily going to look like every other student in the classroom, but it doesn't mean that it can't be something amazing, and maybe even better than I originally planned for it to be.
So I'm going to kind of hopefully be more direct and give you an easier answer this time, instead of the monster I left with you before, but kind of all framed around learned helplessness. And hearing you talk about, finding kids, hedging your bets where, whether it was a suggestion to read ahead or whatever the case may be, I'd love to kind of hear your view on, students in your class compared to regular ed students, because again, in my perspective, all kids can learn, all kids can be successful. They may not have either figured out a learning style that matches what is best for them yet, where they can be successful to the level, or they've experienced a traumatic experience in school, and because of that, they haven't quite gone ahead and received instruction at the pace of their classmates. It's just a timing situation because they're a little bit behind. So one of the frustrating things that we often see as regular ed teachers, or we account and allow a learner with special needs to come in our classroom as a visitor and not a participant, is this idea of the kids coming in, and frankly at this point it's regular ed kid, special ed kid, it could be special ed gifted kid. All kids deal right now with learned helplessness. But how do you have a conversation with regular ed teachers to advocate for, all kids have a place in this classroom, all kids have the ability to be successful, and here's some suggestions that I have because I work so frequently with them?
So one thing I do at the beginning of every year is I give the teachers, and including the specials teachers, because they are dealing with our students, they're dealing with so many more students, it's hard for them to know everybody. But I give them a get to know me card, and I have the student's name, I have the general education class they're assigned to, my name, the child's grade, any other little facts about them. If there's an allergy or a medical need they need to know about, something that could be an emergency situation, I include that. And then I include like a little bit about me. And it might be something like, my fingernails are painted a new color every week. If I start to get upset, talk to me about them, acknowledge them. It might be, I really like to talk about this. Please don't bring up this. Please don't, please don't mention my mom, because that's going to set me off. But, because I have this argument with my mom every morning. And so when I come to school, if someone mentions my mom, I'm going to get upset. There's these things that we know when we work with students that can trigger them. And a new student coming in, it might take a little bit of time, but I make sure my administrators, the general education teacher, and all of those special teachers and our counselor has a copy of these. And at first, I didn't really know how much they were using them, but we had a new assistant principal last year, and she said, when I had one of your students, I would flip through them. She had them on like a binder, and she's like, I would think, okay, this is how I need to talk to them. So I give those teachers some information about the students so they actually know them and don't just know them from their modifications and supports or what they've heard in an IEP conference. Like really special, funny things that can help them connect with that student and have an actual relationship with them when they come into their classroom. And then I try to not just send my paraprofessionals out all the time. I try to make time myself to go with each student different times into those settings. Not as much as I would like to. I'd love to go more. I'd love to do recess every day and be outside playing with them, but try to go out there and do those things with them so that I can speak to it or I can see it or offer support in that moment. It's really hard, I think, sometimes for us to admit we don't know or we don't have an answer. But if I'm in a class sitting there with the kid, working with them, and I have a relationship with them, and I work with the teacher and I talk with them, it makes those natural conversations flow easier about, hey, try this, or this might work better. But that conversation can't just happen in the moment. It has to happen before you're in the classroom working with the teacher so that they know if and they can tell me, hey, if you're in here, I want you to handle all behavior stuff. Maybe they don't feel confident, or maybe they want the paraprofessional to do that. But so often I tell them I would prefer the teacher to do it first. If the student's talking out loud, if they're blurting, if they have hands on someone else, redirect them in the same way, because you're right. There is this learned helplessness, especially at the elementary level. I mean, it is really, really bad. And it's teachers, it's parents, it's community members, it's everyone that has poured this into this child that I can't do this, or it's really, a lot of times I don't want to do this, and so I'm not going to. But we have to make students push themselves. Just like we have to hold high expectations for them, we have to empower them with that expectation of themselves. And so letting the teacher know, no, they can do that just fine, or yes, they can go get that themselves. My students that go and do buddy reading, I started the year by staying with them, going in with them each time. Now someone walks them down and a student brings them back. They don't need one of us walking, holding their hands, especially as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old in fourth grade. They don't need an adult holding their hand down the hallway. They need to be like their peers, and they need to be able to walk and have those conversations. And then also, really, conversations need to happen with our students as well. We have April Autism Awareness Month. March is World Down Syndrome Day, and we have students from both those populations in our school. And so we honor them and we wear the colors and we talk about it, but we share videos and we share resources and books and try to have the conversations with students as well, because they need to understand why this is happening, why a student that may look completely normal or typical to them, why does this student act this way? Okay, well, there's sensory needs, and they hear things differently, they feel things differently, but that can be confusing for a child to say, this child looks just like me. They can talk, they can read, they can do all these things. Why do they have these behaviors? Or why is this person helping them and not helping me? So if we can share that with kids and really encourage them to understand their peers, I mean, what more beautiful, like natural lesson in diversity and inclusion is there than understanding our friends and accepting them? That awareness piece leads to the acceptance, and accepting them at an early age. My own children, like I said, are in third and fourth grade, so they've always been around my students since they've been in elementary school, and they're friends with them. We do things with some of the families outside of school, and so I love to see my son, especially, just the friendships and the relationships he's truly developed with the students that are fourth graders with him as well. I mean, it's hilarious just to see, like, they are just his friends and they're just like everyone else. And there was a day that he was complaining, this one friend, she was pinching me and poking me. And I said, well, you have to tell her to stop. You don't need to come get me. You don't need to get her mom. That's your friend. Just like you would tell anyone else, please don't put your hands on me. I don't like it. And we've had those conversations with other students. Somebody said this, they said this that wasn't nice, or I didn't like when they did this. Did you tell them? Did you explain to them? Well, I didn't know I could. Then that's on me, that I haven't expressed to them and I haven't taught them, the general education students, how to better interact. And I haven't equipped the general education teachers in how to have those conversations with their students, because kids know, even your kids that are in getting special education services, they know how to act. They're going to push buttons just like your GT or your other kids, your most typical kids. They have those quirks and those behaviors just to get under our skin sometimes. But having those conversations before school even starts, before those students walk in of, this is what I expect. I want you to handle the behaviors. I want you to maybe let this piece go, or give them a fidget to hold or something that can help keep their hands occupied. But expect great things out of them. And if there's a problem, call me. Like my Apple Watch is mainly on during school, so that if I need a text for support somewhere else, that I can get that call quick. Call me. I will come down and support you. But I'm not just going to pull that child away and handle it myself. We're going to handle it as a community and as a collaborative team. And we're going to make sure this hopefully doesn't happen again. And if it does, decide what that consequence will be next time. But it really all comes back to collaboration and in working together to make sure both teams have an understanding of what the roles are in those settings, and making sure as special educators that we are supporting our general education peers. We can't I feel like sometimes special ed teachers get mad that our students aren't included the most we want. But then again, it comes back, well, what have we done to give them that opportunity? How have we prepared the other teachers, and how have we prepared the students in that learning community to work with those other students? And if we haven't done our part, then we can't really be mad that the students aren't getting what we think that they need.
Yeah, you're talking about higher expectations and having these conversations with students, and as I said before about kids transitioning into my room, or just being there from the beginning of the year. I would very often sit down with these fifth graders, or if it's a IEP meeting or it's a meeting that we're scheduling just because we're going to be attempting this transition with parents, I would say, listen, the SDIs are here. I'm going to follow the SDIs. I'm going to do my professional responsibility. But I would also say to the students, like, let's make this our backup plan. Let's try, what can we move away from? What is one that you don't think you need all the time? Or, you were talking about, students holding hands with a paraprofessional. As fifth graders, that's not happening. But I can remember one student in particular, the paraprofessional was out there every day at recess. And I finally realized he absolutely hated that she was out there, because he was the only student with autism in that year in fifth grade. So in his mind, everybody knew she was out there because of him. And so we set up expectations for how he has to act at recess, so that we don't feel that she needs to be out there anymore. And, it broke away from, maybe her being close to being at the door to sometimes being inside. I don't remember if we transitioned out of that or not, but I remember times where he would screw up, and it was like, all right, well, she's right back there next to you again the next day. And, building up those expectations where, those, whether it be SDIs or just general things that we're doing with them on a daily basis, let's make that our fallback plan. If things don't go well, yeah, we'll do this, or you can retake that test, or you can redo the assignment, or, whatever the case is, but really trying to build those students up to be more independent. And, I would also, this was something I did with my students in general, but with them as well, is be self-advocates. Like, you can have an alternative study guide, or you can have this, but I want you to ask for it. I want you to tell me, Mr. Herman, I need that right now. Like, I definitely need preferential seating right now, or whatever the case is, because, as they progress, once they turn 14, they can start participating in those IEP meetings, and, all those different things. Like, they have to become self-advocates, because if they pursue college, that's going to be a whole, I don't really even know what it looks like. I just know you have to really be a self-advocate for yourself. When you're in the workforce, all those different pieces, I really wanted them to push themselves for that. So, as a regular education teacher, do you have any advice for how we can confidently push these students to reach for higher levels of or higher expectations, but also not stress that I'm like not implementing the IEP, or I'm not doing my professional responsibility?
Absolutely. I'm thinking about an instance this year with a student that I had last year. She was in third grade, and we decided, globally looking at her needs, that self-contained was too restrictive. Yes, there were some big academic deficits, but socially, this was not the right setting for her. And so I remember her first parent-teacher conference in October. The resource teacher was a new teacher at our school, and the general education teacher came to talk to me. And they were so worried about the parents and coming to the parent-teacher conference, because the child had C's in her fourth grade curriculum. And I was like, that's great. I was like, she has C's, she's getting C's and everything. They're like, yeah. I was like, she's been on an IEP with like 2 to 3 grade levels beneath where she was at, working on skills that were so not on grade level. So within 9 weeks, she's getting closer to grade level work. And they're like, the parents are going to be upset. I'm like, the parents are not going to be upset. Their child is making progress and it's going to be difficult, but let's sit down and talk with them. Let's just see what they think. And the mom, I remember her walking in and she looked at me and, is she coming back to your class? You could see it's the worry. She's not able to do this work. I'm like, this is all good. Let's sit down. And we told her, she's like, she had the same thing as me. She's getting C's. I was like, she's doing okay. She's making progress. And she's like, I never expected her to even be able to do work in the general education setting. And so having those conversations with the students of, sure, when she was in my class, she was getting 90% on these goals that we had set aside. Well, that's great, but our job is to prepare kids. The point of that IEP is we don't want them to have it forever, right? Because eventually they're going to graduate. They're not going to go through life with an IEP. There's got to be life after that and after school. And so we've got to prepare them for that. And if she can get C's this year, well, okay, let's think about middle school. Can we try to get a B or two in one of these areas? The C isn't a fail. And so having realistic expectations, I'm not expecting you to, come out of Miss Saum's room or come out of that special class setting and be getting 90, 100% on everything we're doing. You were able to do that, but that's why we know you were doing that. We're going to challenge you more. So I'm not expecting you to get all of these right. I'm not expecting you to get an A every time. And so having those conversations with students too, I think oftentimes, like you said, let empower them, let them ask for help, but let them know your expectations and let them be realistic of what do you think you can do, kind of put it back on them. And then let's see where that you fall, what happens with that. And what do we need to get you to where you want to be? Because I think that we take away sometimes, we don't give them enough credit of knowing what they can do and knowing that they have the power to change that, knowing they have the power to ask for help or identify that there's a certain thing they're not understanding and know that resource that can support them. If they took great notes, could they use them then on the test because they paid attention, they followed along? Could they use that to take that assessment? Because we need them empowered. I think, like you said, that's just such an important piece of all of this. They're not going to have, even if you look at a resource setting elementary, has typically 8 students. But again, is there going to be a lot of workforce areas that you have one supervisor with 8 people? Probably not somewhere that they want to be. So we can't have them always relying on those things. And of course, we're going to follow the IEP and we're going to have those accommodations and modifications, those supports as we need them. But do we always need them? I don't think that we do. I think sometimes we put so much in place to make sure that they're covered, or we give them what we think they need, that they have to be successful, instead of trying, like I said, with the student in the class next door to me. We started with this split. Can we add on 10 minutes? Can we give a break earlier so maybe she can stay longer here? What can we try to do to make it more successful to them? So be creative. I feel like sometimes we need a few more rebel teachers out there who are willing to look outside the box and say, we don't have to follow that. It's not just a checklist for every kid. Students with special ed services have individualized plans, but every kid is unique. Every kid's different. And so having an idea that isn't necessarily exactly what we expect for every student to be successful, but something that we can try for that kid, and just, don't make them so reliant on all the supports. I think that's just so critical. I love the paraprofessional pulling back from that. We've seen that with some of our students. Another one of my 4th graders, when I came to this school, she was in 1st grade, and there was pictures of goldfish all around the school building. And they had to have her walk, from one classroom door to the edge of the hallway, a goldfish. Okay, now we're going to hear another goldfish. That is the only way they could get her to transition through the hallways. And then they took a few away. And so I was like, what are all these goldfish pictures? Like, oh, you're going to need those for her to move through the halls. Like, okay. And we did a little bit for a while. Well, she's in 4th grade now. And we wrote it into her IEP that she'll go to all of her activities, all lunch, recess, everything, without any paraprofessional support. We attached her to a classroom that did not have any other students receiving para support. So there wasn't even someone there for her to call on. Now her teacher and I can text back and forth if there's a problem, if there's a concern, if she needs to come down at a different time, so that we can make sure that to get her there. but we wrote that in so that we would kind of have to force ourselves to make that happen. And I know not that long ago, she was walking down the hall and another teacher said, "Hey, where are you going?" And she, "Shh, I'm going to phonics." Like, she just brushed him off. Like, I have to get to where I'm going. Please don't interrupt me. I have a place to go. And I think, I mean, yes, it's been 4 years, but it was a goldfish picture on every corner of that school just to walk. And now she takes her things and goes and comes back and forth. And we're not having to follow up. We're not even having to really tell each other, "Hey, she's on the way back," or calling a walkie. She's just doing it independently because we gave her the chance. And we took away that crutch. We took away even the chance that she would default to another paraprofessional that happens to be there. And it's been amazing. And so I'm like, she's ready. She's ready to not need me as much. And that feeling, it breaks my heart when a student leaves our setting, because I love them and I teach them so many years. But to be able to say, "You don't need me or this anymore," I mean, there's no greater success. And it's just the most heartwarming, wonderful experience. And so just giving them the chance. And if we have to pull back, like you said, if the para has to come back out at recess, that's fine. We'll do it. But why not at least try? Let's just see what happens if we step outside and just try a little bit.
I want to just kind of talk from my perspective as a former special ed teacher. One of the responsibilities I always felt like was to manage the stigma of our classrooms for our kids. And I know from my end, my goal was to almost make regular ed kids jealous that they weren't in our classroom. And I would imagine it's very similar of what we're hearing with you, that, it was never that the kids, I wanted them to never leave. Obviously, I loved having them with me, but there was a responsibility to make our location a destination, a sanctuary, a safe place, a place to regroup, to recenter before they would go elsewhere and try something else. And I felt like that was something that was really important within my staff, within my classroom, and really the interactions that regular ed kids saw me beyond just what was underneath my name badge outside my door. And I also felt like that was an important thing when it led to interactions with teachers. I was 22 coming out, and, I had some background with special ed from my own experience and some specialty training. But realistically, I was just a classroom teacher that just really had more time with students to dive into, foundational learning skills and, looking into whether we're doing reading fluency and, progressively looking at, even though I had fourth graders, okay, today we're looking at a second grade passage. We're going to look at a mid-year second grade passage and continue to try and, take those steps back to the fourth grade. So that was just one thing that I know I felt like was a responsibility when I was in that position, and also frames how I am interacting with my special ed team now. Is, I know they're not the saviors, and I'm not also sending my kids down to the special ed wing because I couldn't handle teaching them anymore. It was just, they were going to get the opportunity to teach a little bit more diligently with not any less pressure of grade level content, but they were going to be able to specialize that, 15 minutes in a 2, 3, 4 student to 1 ratio to make sure they understood it. So just whether it's a PSA or anything, regardless of what side you are on, that relationship is really between regular ed and special ed creates the opportunities for the students, and is something that is probably, they talk about the secretary and they talk about the custodian, but really, regardless of which side you fall on, trying to bridge that gap is the greatest success for students in the long run. And a lot of times, I go to my special ed team now and say, I have a student that is not even close to identification, but I'm struggling to get them to understand fractions. What's a strategy you use? They may not have the answers. They don't have that much special training. They just have certain training that allows them, and programs and support and, experience to know how to break things down in a, sequential way. So
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, I was just say that is so, even my students who have gone higher and they are doing more than I'm like typically teaching kids in my class, I can go to our math interventionist or that grade level teacher and say, please show me how you're doing this. So at least I can find a better way. Because we do have our specialties, there's content areas, it's just, but when you work together, it's amazing what we're doing for kids.
And that's what it's all about. That's that our kids mentality, which I think is a really, really important thing. Ken, go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't want to transition off this conversation at all because I think it's incredibly valuable and incredibly important. And you clearly have so much experience and knowledge in this area. But, for anyone that's listening for the first time, our conversations are unscripted. There's no guided questions whatsoever. But we do collect some information just so we can get to know the guests a little bit. And in your intro form that you provided for us, you mentioned about supporting military connected families and their unique needs. And you also mentioned at the beginning of the show about being a military family yourself. So can you just share what you are doing in your position, whether it be with your kids or your school, and how you're supporting our military?
Yes. So April is actually Month of the Military Child, and it's recognized across our nation to really celebrate the diverse needs and experiences of military connected families. So I've been married to my husband over 15 years, and we have two children, like I said, third and fourth grade. And my husband's actually gone right now. He's on what the military calls a unaccompanied PCS. So they moved him without us for a little over a year, and he'll be back this summer. And it's really interesting, these pockets. We're close to Little Rock Air Force Base, but all 50 states, the Department of Defense schools, we lived in Germany, Japan, Korea. There's military families all over the United States. And so these kids are typically moving every 2 to 3 years. My family's been fortunate that we haven't had quite as many, but they're moving a lot. And they might move, especially as they get older, they're losing credits or sports, different clubs, different things they're involved in. And so one thing I was asked to step on as a member of the Arkansas Military Interstate Children's Compact Commission. And this is something, as a military spouse who's been pretty plugged in to the military community throughout my husband's career, I did not know about. And this is a compact between all 50 states that provides resources to students as they're moving in and out of the state. They have protections for them of making sure that if they're moving into a new state and they're in an advanced course, trying to find the most closely aligned course to match that so they're not losing credits. If they've missed a sports team tryout, they're not guaranteed to make that team, but they get an opportunity to at least try out and show what they're capable of. It's services to connect the students with the Department of Education within their state to make sure to get the resources they need, with the school liaison on the base, just to have people to advocate and be a voice for them. And again, my children are younger, so the graduation concerns haven't been a big issue yet, but these military moves really affect kids. A lot of times they're already been away from their parents a lot. They could have dealt with an injury or of a loss of a parent. They're dealing with mental health issues that, the military, that's kind of stigmatized, more so even in the military. And there's a lot of needs there academically and socially. And so I just kind of want us to continue that conversation. I think as a nation, we look at the war's over. We've pulled out of Afghanistan. We're out of Iraq, all these things that we don't really hear about in the news much anymore. But as a military spouse with a large number of military friends, my husband's been gone years of our marriage. I mean, this will be about 14 months. It'll be the longest he's gone at one time, but 4, 6, 7 months over and over and over. There's moms and dads missing a lot of their children's lives. And I think even though we don't see wars happening like we did for the first 20 years after 9/11, and even prior to that, any student that's in our school now that's military family, their whole life has been impacted by a significant number of deployments. And so not forgetting that they're going to have behavior needs that don't always seem evident at first. They may be a really high performing student and we don't understand why these things are happening. Just as hard it is as mom and dad leave, coming home can be even more traumatic in a family. Just readjusting to, if the oldest child's a boy and dad comes back, there's a new man back in the house. I mean, little things that we don't necessarily think about. So I just want schools to be prepared to serve those students, to identify ways they can include them. A student may have moved from overseas where the social norms are completely different in the classroom than what they're experiencing here in whatever state they're in. I'm sure in Pennsylvania and Arkansas, some of the social norms are different. So understanding that the expectations are going to feel different. They may not be as advanced academically, or where they were living, they may have learned way more. So pair them up, let them be the tutor or the student that needs the supports so that they can go ahead and feel at home and a place in the community. And then I just want to encourage people, like, love those military families. We have been so blessed that wherever we lived, we've had local people embrace us and love us and accept us. And that makes being away. My in-laws are in Alaska and my parents are in South Carolina. We don't have family nearby. If somebody gets sick, I depend on someone to help. If I have to take a child to the hospital, I need a friend or a neighbor to help. And just be prepared to do that. You might only have that family in your life 2 or 3 years, but you are going to make such a meaningful difference to them and supporting them and loving them and filling that gap that they might not have anyone else willing or able to fill. But schools play a huge role in that. Our counselors can support, our teachers can support, and just even acknowledging and identifying this month, that it's the month of the military child, and celebrating them, asking them to share their experiences, letting them shine and share what they've learned living in those different places can really just give them an identity that sometimes that military kid identity is rough, but letting them shine and show off the fun and unique parts of it is really special.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that I don't have that perspective. I didn't grow up in a military family, and my wife and I don't create one now. But you know, it's easy to say that it's obvious to know that they might have moved a lot. Like, there's that emotional toll, but there's so many more layers that you just shared that I would have never thought of. The emotional piece being one of the most important parts of that, but also just the logistical piece, like you were saying about credits not transferring as a high school student, or you moved in 2 weeks after football tryouts. Like, all those different pieces, I never really would have thought of. So I'm gonna bug you after the show for you to share just any links that you have of this coalition that you're a part of, anything else that we can do to promote that. We will absolutely do as much as we possibly can with what following we have here, because even if it helps one of those military families, then it's totally worth it. So thank you for sharing that. Thank your husband for his service, and I know that that thank you needs to go to the family as well, because there's so many sacrifices that you make, that your kids are making on behalf of our safety and well-being. And like you said, just because there's not an active war that we're seeing on the news here, there are military professionals all over the world at all times. And, there's nothing that matters more to our country. And, we always have to give thanks for that. So thank you very much for sharing that. And also for what you're doing for military families and these military kiddos. So again, I don't want to cut that short, but I do want to be cognizant and respectful of your time. So I do want to jump into our exit ticket, which is the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. So question number 1, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Oh, the best thing they can do, I think, if you let them know every day that you love them, even the ones that are so hard to love, that they're safe, and you're going to do everything you can to let them have a successful day. Just letting them know you might be the only person that lets them know that you love them and they're safe when they're with you. I think that can change every part of the day. Starting the day, letting those children know them, greet them at the door, let them know that they are valued and important.
And I loved your idea of you can start that day saying, hey, it's a new day, regardless of how yesterday went. What is the best piece of advice that you've received? And it could be from a colleague, a supervisor, or even a student.
Oh gosh, that's really hard. I think just to give grace. And I think that goes back to like what we said about letting the day before. And that grace has to extend to families. It's so easy, like I said earlier, for us to sometimes think, oh, this parent or this family. And it's so easy to forget everything that they're going through too. I try to remember, even when it doesn't seem like it in my mind, that these parents are sending us their best. They're sending us their absolute best. They're entrusting us with their best. And so it is our responsibility to give them some grace, the same grace that we would hope they would give us, and understanding what we're doing as educators, and do that every single day. Wake up and choose to give that grace to the children and their families.
Perfect. So we obviously know that the school year goes in waves. There are, challenging times that we struggle to survive, whether that's report cards or, the night before a big IEP meeting or whatever the case may be. What is something that you would like to share to every educator that would benefit in powering up through that moment of struggle?
I think that we have to remember that I know sometimes teachers, I've been teaching forever, I've been in this profession forever, and there's nothing else I can do, or I don't know what else I want to do. But we get to do this every day. And I think that is what we need to remember. No one's forcing us, no one is making you get up, no one's making you go to work. I mean, you don't get paid if you don't, you'll get in trouble, but you have to choose this. And if you're going to choose something to do, choose to do it well. You're going to be there. You're going to go into the classroom. So why not give it your all? And yes, you're going to leave tired. I've said before, sometimes I feel like my children, my personal children at home, don't always get my best because I've given my best all day. And that's really hard. And so I'm not saying, pour from an empty cup or neglect your own needs, but set your mind to that. Like, I get to do this every day. I don't have to. And I think when we start looking at it like that, that this is a privilege to positively impact children and teens' lives. I mean, there's just no greater opportunity in the world. There's no one else in the world doing better work than educators.
That was an awesome answer.
Thank
So
you.
it's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What do you think separates teachers who are the ones constantly seeking change, innovation, and implementing new teaching strategies?
I think those teachers are looking for fun and they're looking for joy. They're choosing to keep joy into their classroom and they're wanting to keep students engaged. We start to see behaviors, we start to see problems when learning is boring and when it's not engaging, when we're not doing these innovative, exciting things. And so I think the teachers that have the most success, that have these classrooms that are doing these great things, they're choosing joy and they're choosing to have fun in their classroom. I I will dress up for any dress up day ever. I'm probably like one of the few parents and teachers that's like, bring on the dress up days. But kids love that stuff. And if we can just incorporate something crazy and fun and neat into something that they get engaged with. We did Talk Like a Pirate Day as a fundraiser and a dress up day this fall. And we did all the like AR blends and we did all this crazy stuff. Kids loved it. And it was so easy. It was hardly any work, but it was just something fun and different. Maps. There's just so many different things content wise that we could even connect to it to have fun with your kids. And especially if you're an elementary school teacher, like dress up with those kids. They want to see their teachers doing silly, crazy things. I roller skate, and when the weather's nice on Fridays, like I'll wear roller skates to open the car doors at school, or I have a Miss Frizzle dress, and I'm like, one day I just wear like, what dress up day do we miss? I'm like, it's just Tuesday. It's just a fun day to wear a fun dress. Like these kids want and need to come to school having fun. So find ways to bring joy into the classroom. The kids deserve it. And we do too as teachers. We want to have fun, right? Like we didn't go into teaching to be like the grumpy old lady down the hall. We want to be happy and fun because we want kids to have fun too.
You speak in a way that absolutely embodies everything that I believe. If you saw my closet, my outfits get well used, whether it's onesies or Halloween costumes. We have a national park ranger Skyping with us tomorrow, so I have badges and my uniform all set for tomorrow to go along with it. So couldn't agree more. Jessica, I've loved this conversation. I'm sure I can speak for Ken as well. And I feel like this conversation, reminds us of just good educational practices. It doesn't matter your background. It doesn't matter, what your title of classroom is. You work with kids. And so I know I've enjoyed having that conversation, learning from your perspective with a unique group of kids that have, special quirks, but also, many gifts that they bring to your classroom. So I know I've enjoyed this conversation. I guess the last question we have for you is, how can we continue this conversation? It looks like you're doing some incredible work. What is the best way to follow along, whether that's social media or a website that you could share with the audience?
So I am on Twitter, and I keep that very much my professional education base. There's a lot of stuff coming up with all the state teachers of the year. We're going to DC at the end of December. And so I'm on Twitter as Jessica Saum. I have a Jessica Saum Arkansas 2002 or 2022 Teacher of the Year Facebook page. But I really do a lot through Twitter. And I write and publish op-eds and try to publish as much stuff there and share as much stuff there as possible. So I'd love people to follow along there. It's just such a great way I try to filter out some of the negativity on, teacher Twitter, but just be that positive voice and that excitement of, what still is happening that's great in education, because there's a lot of it. We just need those happy teachers sharing their stories and sharing their voices.
Absolutely. Jessica, thank you so much. This has been a blast. I think your perspective and your knowledge base and your just wealth and your experience on special ed was a really, really valuable conversation for both the special ed teachers and for regular ed teachers to kind of listen back to and take some notes on not only these strategies, but the mindset and just the way we're interacting with kids and making sure that we're building them up to be successful individuals. As well as thank you for what you shared about the supporting military families. Like I said, I'll bother you to get as many links as would be valuable, and we will post all of that on our show notes page, which can be found at powereduup.com/show68. So all of that will be there, as well as links to your Facebook page and your Twitter profile and some of those other pieces. So thank you so much. It is incredibly obvious to me in just over an hour why you were selected as the 2022 Teacher of the Year, because I just think you have so much to offer to the education community, and your state is now going to benefit from your advocacy that I know you're going to be bringing, as well as your school and your kids are clearly benefiting from your presence every day. So thank you so much for everything that you do for education. So
thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. So Matt, why don't you go ahead and close down shop for us?
All right, Jessica, as we power down this episode, you left us feeling powered up. Thank you for the time. For those listening, stay well. It's a, transition of seasons can bring out sniffles. I know you may hear it in my voice, but we are getting towards the tail end. So make every moment count, and summer will be here before you know it. So without further ado, we'll end this episode and talk to you guys next week.